It was just destruction that didn't need to take place. The violence in the murder, it wasn't just a single shot. Linda was shot in the head and stabbed. David Lacey was shot several times. Same thing with Harold Drury. We had a serial killer at that point.
They say that your life flashes before your eyes, before you're killed. I don't know how much time my dad had to think, but if there's any wish that I have, it's that he knew that I loved him.
Not only did they kill her, but the torture they put her through before. I mean, that's an animal. But he was a good person until this point in his life. It's hard to even think that he's in prison and he's never coming home. He looks so young. And he just kind of looks hollow. It's a shame that the people that he hurt will never know that at one time Chad wasn't like that. I miss the old Chad. The Chad before he started getting in trouble and doing horrific, horrible, mean things. That just tears you up to think somebody you love so much could really be that person inside. Chad was a neighbor that lived on the same street that we did. He was next to the youngest of 5 kids. He was delightful. I was probably 16, and Chad was just a few months old when I started babysitting. The first time they asked me to babysit, I went down to their house, and I couldn't believe what I saw when I walked in. It was filthy dirty. The kids were filthy dirty. Laundry everywhere. A couch that had just been urinated on over and over. His mom had a temper. Not that she ever, I don't think, got physical with the kids, but she was a screamer. And she seemed like she was in over her head. And the dad just wasn't, he worked, that's what he did. Within seconds, I knew I wasn't staying there to babysit. If she wanted me to babysit, they were coming to my house. They never wanted to go home. They always wanted to stay. As they got older, it was just Chad mostly spending the night. And I mean, he would stay the night for days at a time. He just seemed like he was so happy when he was with us, and then he would start crying when we had to take him back home. It was really sad. My parents were crazy about Chad. He called them mom and dad. I believe my parents talked to Chad's mother about adopting. I think she would have done it. Chad's father was not on board with the adoption plan. It makes me sad that we didn't get him, because his life would have been different, I'm sure.
was about 7:45 in the morning, and my sergeant called me and said that there was a body of a black male that was found in the desert off the side of the road. I was going to be the case agent. So when I arrived on scene, it was a 2-lane highway, desert on both sides of the property. What I first observed is his shirt was pulled up, belly was kind of exposed, his pant pockets were pulled out as if someone went through them. You could obviously see dry blood on the side of his head. I could tell that he was shot several times. David was a loner. He lived a quiet man's lifestyle, and he worked almost every day in that cab company. As I was responding to the scene, I learned that a taxi cab had been found several miles away, and it was completely ransacked. The vehicle was shot up. The tires were shot, the hood was shot, the windows were smashed. It was just totally destroyed. Whoever shot and killed David Lacy and left his body at the first scene, then transported the taxi cab to the second scene. That's when the vehicle was ransacked. It was just destruction that didn't need to take place. I thought it was an attempted robbery that turned into a murder. But why wouldn't they just dump it and leave and get the heck out of there? Well, we have the physical tire evidence. We had the physical footprint evidence. We took every print that we could get out of the cab, and a bloody fingerprint was found in the back seat of the car. But we tried to identify someone that had left that latent print, and we didn't find anyone at that point. In this particular case, the number one thing was trying to identify who committed this crime. But how are we going to do that with the limited information that we had?
This is a picture of me and my dad. And I was a daddy's girl growing up. I was a mommy's girl too. But I had that special thing with my dad. So we had that bond. I haven't seen this picture in a long time. Thinking of him brings up some bad stuff. The later years were, not good memories, but he's my dad. And I don't want to forget him just because of some bad stuff that happened. I was in basic training 12 days when I got the call. We were in the barracks, and the drill sergeant said that I had to go with him to see the chaplain. I immediately thought something was wrong. So I go into the chaplain's office, and my drill sergeant asked me to sit down. And he says to me that Dad was working at a convenience store and was shot to death in Phoenix in a robbery. And I said, "No, sir, you got the wrong, it's not my dad. You got the wrong guy. There's no way he worked at a convenience store. Not my dad. He owns his own company." So he said, "No, I'm sorry." And of course, my first thought is the group had something to do with it. I think my dad got manipulated by these people. What they said went. And if you did something wrong, they would decide what would happen. And it was alluded to that if you left, something bad would happen. The fear of leaving was that no matter how scared you were, you didn't want to leave. There was a fear there. That's one reason I joined the military. I had to get away. I was scared. That was my first thought. Maybe he was trying to leave. Maybe he did something wrong. I initially was very convinced they had to have something to do with it. And then terror set in all over again. I think it took quite a few days or a couple days for the murder to sink in. I think there was so much going on with his death. So many what ifs, the questions surrounding those people. What happened? What did you do to get in trouble? I hadn't spoke to him in 2 years. There was a lot of guilt with that, but yet it was self-preservation. I had to cut ties. He made his choice. I had to make mine. I started hearing my dad talk more about this business partner almost on a daily basis. I was overhearing that they wanted to start some sort of electronics business, that my dad would be doing the finance part of it. I don't remember hearing specifically what his partner would be doing, but my dad would be gone from the home at weird hours. Some days it would be normal, but other days he would not be home for dinner. I started noticing a change when my stepmom started to accompany my dad to go wherever they were going.
The word of the Lord came unto me, saying,
The Bible study was at the man's home, who my dad worked with.
Thus saith the Lord God,
It was just scripture reading, and people would take turns reading.
the end is come upon the four corners of the land.
There were a couple other kids there.
The end come upon thee.
Initially, I started going to these meetings once a week, and then eventually I got to 2 times a week.
Will judge thee according to thy
And then it
works.
started being a little bit more. We would go, or we would stay longer than we did last time.
I shall not spare thee.
Some nights we would be kept out into the wee hours of the morning. That became a norm. Something was out of sorts because it was a very scheduled home. You had a bedtime, even in high school. It wasn't like my dad to break the rules. The life before the group and during the group was very gradual. I didn't see a massive overnight change. It was just a gradual progression. And it was a grooming process.
The cab company didn't really get any information of the party, of what they wanted or where they're going to go. We talked to the Circle K clerk that was there that evening. In those days, they didn't have really good video surveillance like they do now. So we were developing ways to try and figure out who made that phone call. The phone call came in from a pay phone. It was a pay phone that was right outside the Circle K. We went as far as printing that entire pay phone. But fingerprints, when you obtain them, there's not just a computer that you just shove them in and they're going to point out and tell you who they are. I was quickly running out of leads. We didn't have a name of a party being picked up. We didn't have a location of where he was going to be dropped off at that we could follow up on. So we had nowhere to go. Her name was Linda Reynolds. She was 32 years old. She was married, had children, and working as a pizza delivery driver. As I understand, she had an order that she had to deliver to a house that was on the west side. They found her vehicle the next morning, and it was completely ransacked and left in a desert area. The hood was up, all the wires in the engine were cut, the windows were smashed. It was just destroyed. Within 100 yards of the vehicle, they found the body of Linda Reynolds. David Lacy's body was found in the same area, within miles. They saw two different sets of footprints, and another vehicle, tire prints were found in the desert along with Linda's vehicle. The destructiveness of both the vehicles, the violence in the murder, wasn't just a single shot. Linda was shot in the head and stabbed. There was a lot of similarities between the two, and I thought to myself, we had a serial killer at that point. And I was worried that it could happen again soon.
It's just sad. It really is. You know, even at this age, he could have come to any of us and said, I need help. Chad was always very quick-witted. He was a happy person. He would make anybody laugh. He didn't like anybody to be upset. And I think he had some learning disabilities. He struggled, but no. It's hard to even think he's never coming home. Ugh. As he got a little older, I think he probably rebelled more. He got a little cockier. I think he had quit school completely. His friends were questionable. They just seemed shady. Not the kind of friends you want your kids to have. But David, Chad's friend, was actually a nice kid to be around. In 1992, Chad and David came to the house just to visit. Hadn't seen him in a while. And after a little bit, Chad asked my son, Travis, to go outside to see the Jeep that he and my husband were building. So they went out to the garage. And while they were out there, evidently Chad asked Travis if he could leave a gun there for a couple of weeks. I found out later, my son said no, and they left. And that's when I knew something had to be going on that wasn't good, but I didn't know what. I figured maybe they held somebody up, and never would I have thought he could hurt someone. Never.
There was a point where I started realizing something had changed. The biggest thing was the diet. Couldn't eat certain things. Noticing the fridge was a little scarce. I remember ketchup. Could no longer eat ketchup because it was the devil. Noticed our cereal started missing. Noticed that the portions were smaller. Keeping people tired from the long Bible studies to the wee hours, saying what we could and couldn't eat, or when we could or couldn't eat. That is a total form of control. At one point, I was told, you're not playing sports anymore. It was because his business partner didn't want me wasting my time doing that I needed to focus more on what was going on in the group. I was extremely sad. I was extremely angry. I was devastated, yet not being allowed to be mad. I don't think my dad questioned those rules because at this point, he'd quit his other job. He was all in. The business was like an electronics business. Repair of VCRs and stereos, even building circuit boards. Everybody in the group worked at this business. I even worked there making circuit boards. So after school, I would go into the office, and that's what I would do. Sometimes they would stop the work and do a Bible study. Things started changing in the Bible studies when the leader claimed that he was the brother of Jesus. People would wash this man's feet, and you followed what he said. If you were incorrect, you got called out in front of the entire group. If you did something wrong, there was always a repercussion. At one point, my dad was being berated and not react and just take it. That was not the man that I knew as my dad. And I wanted to cry and ask him, why did you let them do that to you? I wanted to yell out in the middle of it. I didn't dare do it. It still resonates, anger. It really makes me angry when I think about it. And it makes me more angry that I didn't say anything. But you did not dare question why. Even if you wanted to, you didn't. You went along with it. You just became numb. When you're mentally tired and exhausted and run down and malnourished, it messes with somebody's mind. I was like, oh man, I'm in this. The stuff's getting serious, but there was no out.
They had discovered a ATM photo of Linda and an unknown suspect. Sometime during the evening that she was captured, they took her to the ATM to try and extract some money. It was late at night, and the suspect was not in full view of the camera, so it was only a partial view of half of his face. Linda didn't make a lot of money or have a lot of money, and I think she was only able to get $20 out of the ATM. We didn't have any particular person in mind at that time, but we knew that they were a white male and from an age range of in the 20s to 30s. What I learned is that that West Side location that she delivered it to was an abandoned house. I felt someone needed to be familiar with the area, number one, to know that that was there. I was able to get some information about the original call. That they ordered a Hawaiian pizza. Instead of having ham on it like it normally does, they had pepperoni on it. I asked, can I get information of how many people in this area ever ordered that exact same order of pizza? And they said, sure, they could do it. The next day, the Phoenix detective did what's called a knock and talk. He went up to the house, knocked on the door. The owner confirmed that her stepson sometimes ordered Hawaiian pizzas, and her stepson was named David Hunt.
This is a picture of me and my dad before the group. Those are good times. Those are good times. I'm not sure what my dad's vulnerability was. Somehow that man found one spot in my dad's head that wasn't the dad that I knew. And he found it and he took advantage of it. When I graduated from high school, the group opened an office in Nevada, and I was moved up to Nevada into an apartment to take care of the business. I still had to read my Bible. I still couldn't eat ketchup, even though I was alone. But I didn't dare put ketchup on anything. Even though they weren't there, they were there. But I was still in that terror stage, the fear stage, where I did not dare leave. I wanted to so bad, but I didn't dare do it. I was scared. I had been removed from them just long enough that I didn't want to go back. At that point, that is when I spoke to my father on the phone. And I remember him saying, you have to come home. And I said, Dad, I'm not coming back. And he cried and he begged. And I kept saying no. That was the hardest thing in my life up to that point that I had to do. Because I knew I was losing my dad. I knew I was literally walking away from my father that I was never going to see again, and my stepmother. Never going to see him again. That was hard, but I needed to get away. I needed to get out. That was the last time I spoke to my father before he passed. That was the last conversation I had with him, but I didn't go back.
ATM photos were not in color at that time. They were very grainy. It was late at night. It was only a partial view of his face, but I thought it was a picture of Chad Lee. And so Chad and David went down to the Phoenix police, and they even offered up voluntarily giving their finger and palm prints. They denied any involvement in the Linda Reynolds murder. You know, they were cool and calm. I was really surprised the way they acted. I wondered if we had the right guys. But later on, I got a phone call from my sergeant saying that they had positively identified prints of Chad Lee on a bloody thumbprint that they found in the taxicab of David Lacey. David Hunt at the time was 14 years old. And he contacted his father, and his father gave us permission to talk to him. David Hunt started telling us about the taxi cab driver. And what he told us was basically on that night, they were both wanting money, and Chad was going to call for a cab, and when the cab arrived, he was going to get in the cab, and David Hunt was going to follow in another car. And as David pulled up, he saw Chad covered in blood. And Chad told him what he had done, that when he pulled up the gun and demanded money, David Lacey came over the back seat in an attempt to grab the gun, and then Chad started firing. And he said he shot 9 times. And he told us that, yes, he was involved with the Pizza Hut delivery driver, Linda Reynolds. But he put most of the blame on Chad Lee, that Chad had raped her, and said that Chad had been the one to kill her ultimately. He, again, was minimizing his responsibility in the whole thing. But Chad was a whole different story. He felt like he was a star and was really talkative. Chad admitted responsibility that he was involved in the murder, but not the sexual assault. As he told it, Linda pulled away from him to get away, and he shot her in the back of the head. As she laid on the ground, he said she was moaning and groaning, and he picked up a knife. And he brought this knife back and plunged it twice into her chest, killing her. At the end of my interview, he kind of bent over, almost in the fetal position, and was holding his sides. And then he started to say that he murdered Harold Drury, the convenience store worker. I was shocked. And what he told me was, as he entered, he walked up to the counter and he brought up the .22 revolver and asked for the money. He said that Harold Drury fought back. At that point, he said he shot him several times. He grabbed the cash register drawer and ran out of the place. I think he was excited after he murdered each one of them. I really think he was playing the part of the bad gangster. They'd been on a crime spree for a while, and they thought they were invincible. No doubt in my mind, if we wouldn't have stopped them, they would have done more. They'd have just kept going.
The day I found out that they had caught the man who had confessed to killing my father, I was just rageful. There were days before I found out about Chad being caught and confessing where I was positive it was the people from the group. But the fact that he confessed to that, it helped me let go of it was the group that set him up, that did it, because he had murdered other people. Maybe if he only murdered my dad and that was it, I still would have held on to it could have been someone from the group. I was happy that they caught him, but my overall emotion was rage. My biggest thing is for guilt. If I never left, he wouldn't have needed that job. So I sit with that guilt be it right or wrong, you know, if I would have stayed, if I would have come home, I would have had a job and he wouldn't have needed to be working overnight at a convenience store. They say that your life flashes before your eyes, before you're killed. I don't know how much time he had to think, but if there's any wish that I have, it's that he knew that I loved him. I still loved him, I still cared about him. I don't want him dying thinking that I didn't.
We had confessions of detailed information about what took place. I think they got less than $300 from all of the murders. You know, it's a shame that these people had to die for just such a little thing or die at all. The personality that Chad displayed doing these things during the act, he was mad, he was angry, he was violent, very violent. But then talking to him in the interview room, he was kind of like trying to be my friend, and was joking around with me. I think he thought he was the superstar at the time, that, you know, it was a big deal. We don't often have multiple homicides done by the same person, and I think he was just riding that wave.
It seemed fake, like we were in a movie or something when I was hearing the stuff they did. And that wasn't the Chad I knew. I don't know what happened or when it happened. But he was a good person until this point in his life. How could he have changed overnight like that? Well, it just takes the air out of you, because you know then that there isn't a chance. He's not going to come home. I can't imagine what Chad feels. He thinks about it. You know, and if it wasn't him, I'd probably say they deserved it. I know that maybe he deserves it, but I just, it still hurts. You still love them, you still think of them as the person you knew before. And it's hard to just turn that off and look at him as a bad person now. So I can't completely give up on him. I still pray for him, I still wish it wouldn't have happened.
I don't know what's become of the group to this day. I personally have not sought them out. I was told that the business partner got in a very bad car accident and died. I'm gonna look like a really bad person saying this, but dying in your sleep would have been too easy. You know, I don't wish ill on anyone, except for two people in this world, and one of them's gone, and the other one isn't yet.
Who ripped your dad away from you, the group or Chad Lee?
Wow, that's a good question. I would say Chad. Because there's a part of me that wants to believe that at some point my dad would have left. But the way I look at it is Chad stripped my dad from me because he didn't have a chance to get out of there. I think my dad was just as much a victim as I was. He was an adult, should he have known better? I don't know what was told to my dad to coax him into this situation. I don't know what made him turn to go down that road and then eventually bring us with him. He got conned the same way I got conned. Yes, I was a kid, but people in that group, they were taught how to react, when to react, and when not to react. That's what you were taught. It was all control. It was all conning. There's a small little piece in my brain, I think, that'll always be there and always make me look over my shoulder. That situation is more traumatic than even my dad's murder because it encompassed my life for years. It happened. I lived it. There's no.
The first thing anyone remembers about that winter in Oregon is the silence, thick, damp, and strangely heavy, the kind of silence that settles over a town only when something has gone terribly wrong. It hung above the treetops like a warning, drifting between the rooftops of Maple Ridge, sliding through cracked windows and dimly lit diners, a quiet that made people speak softer and look over their shoulders a little too often. People still talk about that night in 1998, the night a bright, hopeful 18-year-old girl stepped off the face of the earth and dragged an entire community into the shadow of a cold case no one could escape. They remember the headlights cutting through the rain, the echo of hurried footsteps, the way the world seemed to stop breathing for a moment before reality snapped back and swallowed her whole. And even now, after years of unanswered questions and fading photographs pinned to bulletin boards, one unsettling truth remains. No one ever expected the final clue, the one that would shatter the silence, to come from a single strand of DNA buried deep where no one had thought to look. Her name was Emily Carson, a senior at Maple Ridge High School, the kind of girl people described as too good for something like this to happen to. Top of her class track runner yearbook committee, a smile that drew attention without her trying. On the night she vanished, she had been driving home from a late study session, last seen at a gas station on Highway 42. She bought a bottle of water, exchanged a few words with the clerk, and walked out into the rain. The camera caught her stepping into the glow of her car's headlights, and then nothing. No screams, no struggle. Just the quiet flicker of a security light and the hum of rain on asphalt. A ghost slipping into the night. The police arrived before sunrise. The sheriff at the time, David Holbrook, would later say he knew from the first moment that something was wrong. People don't just disappear here, he told reporters with a tension in his jaw that cameras never failed to catch. Maple Ridge wasn't the kind of town where danger lurked around every corner. It was the kind of town where neighbors borrowed sugar and kids left their bikes on the lawn overnight. But as dawn broke and the search party combed the woods, the only signs of life were footprints dissolving in mud and branches snapping under the weight of officers who feared what they might find. Emily's car was discovered 2 miles from the gas station, pulled over near a clearing. Driver's door open, engine still warm, no keys, no phone, and no Emily. Panic spread fast. The news stations arrived within hours, helicopters buzzing above treetops, still dripping with rain reporters, fighting for a single soundbite that could carry the urgency of the story. Oregon teen missing under mysterious circumstances. One headline blared, "Cold case in the making," another whispered ominously. Parents kept their children close, businesses closed early, and conversations hushed the moment someone walked into the room. Something sinister had stepped into Maple Ridge, and no one could name it. Investigators followed every lead. They questioned classmates, combed through her locker, searched her home. They interviewed truck drivers, hikers, anyone who might have been on that stretch of road that night. Dogs picked up her scent by the car, but it vanished at the edge of the woods as if she had been swallowed whole by the darkness. A jacket was found near a creek days later, same color as Emily's, but tests showed it wasn't hers. A witness came forward claiming she'd seen a figure running through the trees, drenched and stumbling, but the description was vague enough to fit half the county. Every clue slipped through their fingers, every lead turned to ash. It wasn't long before the whispers began: stranger abduction, runaway crime, of passion, serial predator. But the most chilling whisper of all was the one too quiet to say out loud. No trace means she's never coming back. Her parents' home became a shrine of fading hope. Flyers covered the walls, candles melted into the wood of the porch photos, curled at the edges from too much sun and too much time. Reporters visited less often, volunteers thinned out, tips slowed to a trickle. Within months, the case file grew thick with interviews and thin on answers. Sheriff Holbrook aged 10 years before the first anniversary passed. Eventually, the official term found its way into every conversation cold case, a phrase that felt like a death sentence hiding behind procedural language. But it wasn't just a case file that froze. Maple Ridge itself changed. People locked their doors earlier. Teenagers stopped hanging around the highway. The gas station, once a harmless pit stop, became a symbol of dread. Some swore the woods felt darker. Others said they heard things at night: snapping branches, distant footsteps, the rustle of something unseen. It didn't matter whether those sounds were real or born from fear. The effect was the same. The town fell under a long, heavy shadow. For years, the investigation flickered to life only when a new detective reviewed the file or when a supposed tip led to another dead end. Emily's parents refused to leave their home, waiting for a knock on the door that would either bring closure or destroy them. Her mother kept Emily's room untouched. The bed still neatly made, the desk still organized, the posters still pinned exactly as they had been the night she disappeared. Dust settled like a silent witness. Time moved on without permission. Then came the unearthed detail, the one small anomaly buried so deep in the evidence logs that no one had noticed it for over a decade. It began with Detective Mara Delaney, a relentless investigator assigned to cold cases across the state. Delaney was known for her unorthodox methods, for going where others wouldn't, for reopening wounds most towns had tried to forget. When the Carson case landed on her desk, she didn't see a dead end. She saw a question what had everyone else overlooked. She spent weeks combing through evidence item by item, page by page. She rewatched grainy footage, retraced steps on foot, interviewed every surviving witness. And then, one rainy afternoon, not unlike the night Emily vanished, she found it a bag of items collected from the car, sealed and labeled, but never tested with modern DNA methods. Inside, a hair tie, a partial fingerprint, and a single strand of hair stuck to the driver's seat fabric. At the time, DNA technology hadn't been capable of extracting anything meaningful, but now, years later, the game had changed. Delaney submitted the samples for testing. She didn't expect much half the time old evidence degraded beyond use, but when the lab called, their voices were different, tight, urgent. The hair didn't match Emily. It didn't match anyone in her family, and it didn't match any of the suspects from the early investigation. Instead, it matched someone who shouldn't have been anywhere near her car, someone with a record long buried and a history no one had connected to Maple Ridge. But that revelation was still in the future. In 1998, all anyone had was fear and speculation. Theories multiplied as the days stretched on. Some claimed Emily had been stalked for weeks. Others whispered about a stranger seen lurking near the school. A few insisted the woods themselves hid something monstrous, an old hermit, a drifter, a phantom figure who appeared only when the fog rolled in. But the most disturbing rumor involved a car seen speeding down Highway 42 just minutes after Emily left the gas station. Witnesses disagreed on the make, the model, even the color, but they all agreed on one thing. Whoever was behind the wheel was in a hurry, headlights cutting through the dark like a blade. Sheriff Holbrook set up checkpoints. He coordinated with neighboring counties. He stayed awake for nearly 3 days straight before collapsing from exhaustion. Reporters began criticizing the department. Families questioned whether enough was being done, and still nothing. No trace of Emily. No trace of the driver. Just echoes in the trees and a community unraveling one thread at a time. The search expanded to 5 counties. Helicopters scanned riverbanks. Divers searched the lake. Volunteers combed the woods, shoulder to shoulder, calling her name into the endless stretch of pines. But every attempt ended the same way: cold wind, empty trails, and a void that refused to give anything back. Emily's disappearance became the kind of story people told in lowered voices. Children grew up hearing warnings attached to her name. Travelers passing through Maple Ridge sensed a strange tension beneath the surface, an uneasiness that made them roll up their windows and keep driving. The town learned to coexist with uncertainty, to live with the haunting question of how someone could vanish so completely. A year passed, then 5, then 10. The world changed, but the Carson case stayed frozen in time, trapped in 1998, like a photograph left too long under dim light. The only signs of movement came from the aging faces of investigators who still murmured her name when files were shuffled and budget meetings ended. They remembered her smile, her eyes, the way she looked on that grainy camera footage. They remembered because they couldn't forget. And somewhere buried quietly in a sealed evidence bag, the truth waited silent, fragile, and powerful enough to crack the case wide open once someone finally looked closely enough. Holbrook always said the woods on the north side of Maple Ridge had a way of holding secrets, the kind of secrets that didn't want to be found. Even years after Emily Carson's disappearance, people still avoided the trails after dusk, still quickened their pace when passing the clearing where her car had been discovered. Nature had reclaimed most of the trampled earthgrass growing over old footprints moss, climbing the trunks where posters once hung, but the unease remained. Locals claimed the air felt different there, heavier, as if whatever happened that night had left an indelible mark on the ground itself. And in the early years of the investigation, that sense of dread wasn't just superstition. It was a constant reminder that Emily's story had slipped away into the trees, leaving behind a chilling silence no one could break. Detectives walked the area countless times, hoping that maybe they'd missed something, a piece of clothing, a trail, a sign of struggle, but every sweep ended the same way. The wind whispered through branches, leaves rustled underfoot, and the only thing they found was more uncertainty. The rain washed away tracks within hours. The earth swallowed anything that might have fallen. Search dogs circled again and again, noses to the ground, but each time the scent evaporated into the forest like smoke. One handler swore the dog kept leading him toward the creek, only to spin in confused circles, as if the trail had been severed midair. "It's like she disappeared between one breath and the next," he muttered, shaking his head. Still, the investigation pushed forward, fueled by equal parts desperation and determination. Officers interviewed everyone who had crossed paths with Emily that week: teachers, teammates, classmates, neighbors. Some offered stories filled with admiration: how she volunteered at the shelter, how she helped struggling students with homework, how she always held the door open for others. Others whispered about recent stress, about arguments overheard in hallways, about a boy she'd been seen talking to behind the bleachers. Hollywood dramatization loves a villain, but Maple Ridge offered only half-formed suspicions and rumors that dissolved when pressed too hard. The boy in question was a fellow student named Joel Pritchard, quiet, athletic, often seen with Emily in the months leading up to her disappearance. Naturally, investigators wanted to know more. But when questioned, Joel seemed genuinely shocked. He claimed they were just friends, that they studied together occasionally, that he had no idea where she might have gone. His alibi checked out. He was at his part-time job the entire night, and after a lengthy interview and a background check that turned up nothing, he was cleared. Still, years later, people in Maple Ridge would mention his name in hushed tones, not because they believed he was guilty, but because his life had become intertwined with a tragedy he couldn't escape. The gas station clerk, a middle-aged man named Dennis Mallory, remembered Emily vividly. He described her purchasing water, tapping her card, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. "She seemed tired but unbothered," he said. No sign of fear, no one lurking behind her. No voice shouting from outside. She left with the bottle in hand and walked confidently toward her car, not glancing over her shoulder. If something happened to her, Dennis insisted it didn't happen here. She wasn't scared. She wasn't running from anything. But investigators weren't so sure. When they pulled the security footage, they noticed a shadow, long distorted, passing behind the far pump just as Emily stepped out of view. The camera quality was grainy, unable to capture detail, but the movement was unmistakable. It could have been a trick of the light, a passing bird, a condensation blur, or it could have been a person watching her. The clip was analyzed frame by frame, enlarged, slowed, filtered, reprocessed, yet the shape remained ambiguous. Without certainty, it became another agonizing maybe in a case drowning in uncertainty. For Holbrook, the worst moment came on the 5th night of the search when hope had begun to fray. He stood by the clearing flashlight, cutting a narrow path through the darkness, listening to the officers calling Emily's name in the distance. The forest responded with nothing but its usual sounds, crickets dripping branches, the faint rush of the creek. He later recounted how the silence pressed in on him, suffocating and heavy. It was then he knew they weren't looking for someone who'd simply gotten lost. They were hunting the aftermath of something much darker. The town felt that darkness, too. Maple Ridge had festivals, parades, summer concerts in the park, but that year everything dimmed. Parents grew more protective, teenagers stopped gathering near the highway. The gas station saw a drop in nighttime customers. Every unfamiliar car became a point of suspicion. Strangers walking through town drew uncomfortable stares. The community, once open and trusting, built walls overnight. And yet, through the years, rumors never stopped. Some believed Emily had been taken by someone passing through an opportunistic predator whose identity would never be known. Others floated wilder theories that she'd staged her disappearance, that she'd fallen into the river and been carried away, that she'd encountered something supernatural in the woods. None of it held weight, but people spoke these theories aloud because doing so made the fear easier to bear. Giving a monster a name was always better than leaving it faceless. Years turned into decades, and as new tragedies emerged elsewhere in the world, Emily's story faded from the headlines. The candles on her porch flickered out one by one. Her mother stopped attending community searches not because she had given up, but because grief had settled into her bones, and walking past her daughter's car, found abandoned in memory, became too much to bear. Her father, once animated and hopeful, grew quiet, spending long hours staring out the window toward the tree line. He confessed to a neighbor that some nights he imagined Emily still wandering the woods, calling for help just out of reach. The case file grew thicker. Hundreds of pages documenting every interview, every report, every wild lead. Sometimes detectives would reopen the file with renewed energy, flipping through worn sheets, hoping something new would reveal itself. But each time they reached the same haunting conclusion, there was nothing left to find. Maple Ridge tried to move on, but the cold case lingered like a bruise, tender even after years had passed. And then everything changed with a single administrative decision, one that seemed inconsequential at the time. The state launched a project to review cold cases more systematically. They formed a new task force equipped with updated technology and a mandate to reinvestigate evidence previously deemed insufficient. That's how Detective Mara Delaney entered the picture. She was known for cutting through noise, for spotting inconsistencies others overlooked, for following instinct into places where logic hesitated. When she first opened the Carson file, she noticed the patterns immediately. The inconsistencies in early witness timelines, the missing test results, the items collected but never analyzed due to outdated methods. She spent nights in her office desk lamp, illuminating a sea of paperwork while rain tapped on the window. Something in the file bothered her, a sense that the story wasn't just incomplete but misinterpreted, as though investigators had been so focused on where Emily vanished that they'd stopped asking why. She revisited the gas station footage, this time using enhanced software. The shadow remained frustratingly indistinct, but when she adjusted the contrast, she noticed something strange in the reflection of Emily's car door. A faint outline, possibly a person standing several feet behind her vehicle. It was impossible to confirm, too blurry, too distorted, but it reignited questions long considered settled. Had someone been watching her? Following her? Had the abduction been opportunistic, or had it been planned? Delaney refused to let the blurry outline become another dead end. Her instincts pushed her deeper. She began reconstructing the timeline minute by minute, step by step, as though she were walking in Emily's shoes. When she reached the clearing where the car had been found, she sensed the weight of the place immediately. The silence still lingered, almost unchanged, despite the decades that had passed. She crouched beside the area where the driver's door would have swung open, imagining Emily stepping out calling for help, or being forced. The leaves rustled in the wind, whispering fragments of a moment frozen in time. But the real turning point came when she examined the evidence logs. The old bag containing the hair tie fingerprint and strand of hair caught her attention. Why hadn't it been fully processed? The reports indicated that early DNA testing had failed due to degradation and insufficient markers. But now, with advanced sequencing techniques, those same samples could reveal information that had been unreachable before. It was like discovering a locked room in a house she'd walked through dozens of times. She signed the request forms, sealed the evidence in new containers, and sent it to the state laboratory. Days passed in an agonizing countdown. She checked her phone constantly, rewatched footage, reread statements, even visited Emily's old house. The boarded-up windows reflected her silhouette as she stood on the porch imagining the family that once lived behind them. She walked through the side yard, listening to the wind, and felt the presence of a story that refused to stay buried. Then came the call. Her phone buzzed at 9:14 a.m. She answered immediately, heart-hammering. The voice on the other end was steady but tinged with astonishment. The hair sample had produced a full profile, and it belonged to someone unexpected. Someone not previously connected to the case, someone whose DNA had been entered into the system only recently. Delaney didn't breathe for a moment. A new name was about to enter a story frozen in time, a name that would crack open the cold case that had haunted Oregon for 25 years. A name no one in Maple Ridge was prepared to hear. The name echoed in Detective Mara Delaney's mind long after the call ended, a name she had never encountered in the original Carson files, a name that did not belong to any classmate, neighbor, friend, or drifter ever linked to Maple Ridge. It belonged to a man who in 1998 wouldn't have drawn a second glance in Oregon because he hadn't been living anywhere near Maple Ridge at all. His name was Thomas Rayner, and the database matched his DNA with a confidence level so high it erased every possibility of coincidence. The strand of hair found on Emily's driver's seat didn't just belong to Rayner, it placed him inside her car on the night she vanished. Delaney sat in her car outside the state lab, rain streaking the windshield like thin cracks spreading across old glass. The world seemed to tilt slightly, as though a story buried for decades had suddenly lurched back to life and demanded attention. She scrolled through the preliminary report again, her eyes tracing the clean, clinical lines that carried devastating implication. There, it was impossible to ignore profile match Rayner Thomas. Classification, violent offender, multiple arrests, post-2007. Underneath a list of charges, assault, attempted kidnapping, unlawful restraint. Crimes scattered across 2 states, escalating over the years like a slow-burning fuse, finally reaching its last inch. But the report also revealed something else, something more unsettling. Rayner had not entered the criminal system until nearly a decade after Emily's disappearance. In 1998, he had no arrest record, no DNA on file, no documented connection to anyone in Maple Ridge. Nothing that would have allowed investigators to see him. He was invisible, then a ghost moving through the world without leaving a trace. And yet his DNA was in the car. The contradiction made Delaney's pulse quicken. Ghosts didn't leave hair behind. Ghosts didn't materialize inside the car of a missing girl. Someone real had been there. Someone deliberate. She started the engine and pulled onto the wet road tires, hissing through puddles. The town landscape blurred past gray sky, wind-bent trees, power lines trembling under sheets of rain, but her mind remained sharp. She needed to know who Rayner was in 1998, where he lived, who he associated with, why he had been anywhere near Emily. She needed to know whether he had followed her, targeted her, or crossed paths with her by chance. And most importantly, she needed to know what he had done after that night. Because Rayner wasn't just a clue. He was a fracture line running straight through the heart of a cold case, threatening to split it open. The first stop was the Department of Corrections. The receptionist, accustomed to the urgency of investigators, directed her to a glass-walled office filled with file folders and buzzing fluorescent lights. The clerk pulled Rayner's information with a few keystrokes, the screen casting a pale glow across his glasses. "He's been out for 3 years," the clerk said, without looking away from the monitor. "No recent arrests, no parole violations." Then, with a glance toward Delaney, "You think he's involved in something else?" Delaney didn't answer. She was already thinking ahead. His last known address was listed a small aging apartment complex in Brookhaven, 2 hours from Maple Ridge. She wrote it down, thanked the clerk, and stepped back into the hallway where old linoleum squeaked under her boots. Brookhaven, not far enough to be irrelevant, but far enough that his presence in 1998 required explanation. She imagined him younger, blending into crowds unnoticed. Maybe he had been passing through. Maybe he had been visiting someone. Maybe he had been stalking someone long before the system caught his name. As she drove toward Brookhaven, the rain eased to a light drizzle, the clouds thinning but not breaking. The hum of the engine blended with her racing thoughts. She replayed early witness statements, looking for any mention of unfamiliar men in town rental cars parked near the highway out-of-state plates. Nothing obvious came to mind, but she knew how unreliable memory became after so many years. People misremembered. People filled in blanks with imagination. People forgot what mattered. But DNA didn't lie. DNA didn't fade. It didn't twist stories or embellish them. It anchored the truth to something tangible. The apartment complex sat on the edge of town, a squat gray building with peeling paint and a metal stairwell that creaked under the slightest pressure. Children's bicycles leaned against cracked walls. A dog barked somewhere inside. Delaney scanned the mailboxes. Rayner Unit 3B. She didn't expect him to answer the door, but she approached anyway. The hallway smelled of damp carpet and fried onions, life unfolding normally in a place hiding something extraordinary. She knocked. No response. Knocked again, harder. Silence. She tried the handle. Locked. A neighbor peeked through a cracked door, eyes wide, cautious. "He's not home," she said. Voice hushed. "Tom doesn't come around much these days. Works odd hours." Delaney flashed her badge. "When was the last time you saw him?" The neighbor hesitated. "Couple nights ago, maybe. He keeps to himself. Doesn't talk much. Comes in late, leaves early. Strange guy, if you ask me." Delaney thanked her, but the unease lingered. Strange guys didn't always kill, but killers were almost always strange. She left her card wedged into the doorframe, then headed back to her car. There was more to dig into employment records, travel history, known associates, but a nagging thought pulled her sharply back to the original case. Rayner's DNA had been in Emily's car, but there had been no signs of struggle, no blood, no fingerprints belonging to him. Only the hair. A single strand. Barely enough to place him, but unmistakable in its significance. He had been close enough to shed DNA, close enough to lean into the car, close enough to... Her phone buzzed, a blocked number. She answered quickly. "Detective Delaney." The voice on the line was low, hesitant. "I heard you were looking for me." She froze. "Who is this?" "You left your card at my door," the voice said. "This is Rayner." The line hummed. Rain tapped lightly on her windshield. Her heartbeat quickened. "Mr. Rayner, I'd like to ask you some questions." Silence stretched painfully. "Then I figured you would." A breath. "We should talk. Where are you?" she asked, gripping the steering wheel as if the answer might knock her off balance. Another breath. "Not far," he said. "There's a diner off Route 9, the kind of place nobody goes to unless they're trying to hide. Meet me there. 10 minutes. The call ended before she could ask anything else. Her mind raced. Meeting him alone was a risk, but Delaney wasn't the type to let fear dictate her choices, especially not now. She drove fast tires slicing through shallow puddles, headlights reflecting off wet asphalt. The diner sat at the bend of the road, its neon sign flickering like an old heartbeat. Only 2 other cars were parked outside, both empty. Inside, the lights glowed dimly, casting long shadows across the booths. Rayner sat in a corner, hat pulled, low-hooded jacket damp from weather. He looked older than his records indicated, face worn by years of trouble. His eyes tracked her approach, guarded, but not hostile. She sat across from him. No handshake, no greeting. Just tension coiled tightly between them. "You're digging in places people forgot about," he said, voice gravelly, "or chose to forget." Delaney leaned forward. "Your DNA was found in a missing girl's car. I need to know why." A flicker crossed his face. Fear guilt, something darker. He swallowed. "I never touched her," he said quickly. "I never hurt that girl." "But you were there," Delaney pressed. "You had contact with her, not the way you think." His hands trembled slightly beneath the table. It was a mistake, a stupid, stupid mistake. Delaney's mind sharpened. "Tell me." But Rayner didn't speak immediately. His gaze shifted toward the window as if expecting someone or something to appear out of the rain. "I haven't talked about that night in years," he whispered. "Didn't think I ever would. But if you've got my DNA, then the truth's coming, whether I want it to or not." He paused, then met her eyes with a haunted expression. "I wasn't alone." The words sliced through the air with chilling precision. Not alone, not a solitary predator, not a random encounter. Something else. Delaney held her breath. "Who was with you?" Rayner hesitated, eyes darting toward the door as though the name itself might summon danger. His voice dropped so low she barely heard it. "You won't believe me?" he murmured. "No one ever did. Try me." Another long pause. The diner's neon sign buzzed. A waitress clattered dishes in the back. Somewhere outside, thunder growled. Finally, Rayner spoke. "I wasn't the one you should have been looking for. The person who took that girl. The one who planned everything." He swallowed hard fingers, digging into the edge of the table. "He was someone from that town. Someone you all trusted." Delaney's pulse spiked. "Give me a name." His lips parted, but before the sound emerged, the diner door swung open with a sharp metallic creak. Rayner tensed instantly. His eyes widened in terror. "Too late," he whispered, and the world seemed to hold its breath as a figure stepped inside, casting a long, distorted shadow across the floor, just like the one in the gas station footage. The door creaked open so slowly it felt deliberate, as if the figure stepping into the diner wanted the entire room to notice their presence before their body fully emerged from the rain-drenched darkness outside. Light from the flickering neon sign slashed across the floor, stretching the shadow into a distorted silhouette that crawled toward Rayner like some long-forgotten nightmare, reclaiming its shape. Delaney watched the way his jaw clenched, the way his knuckles whitened around the edge of the table, the way every muscle in his body tightened, as if he'd just seen death walk through the door wearing familiar skin. She didn't turn immediately. Instinct told her that moving too fast would spook the wrong person. Instead, she shifted her hand slightly toward her hip index finger, brushing the grip of her holstered weapon beneath the tablecloth, her breath shallow but controlled. The figure stood motionless at the threshold for a heartbeat too long, letting the world quiet around them. Then they stepped inside. Just a man, mid-50s, gray jacket soaked through raindrops, clinging to the strands of hair plastered across his forehead. Not a monster, not a shadow creature, not what one imagines when hearing the words "cold case missing girl, 25 years of silence." But it was the ordinariness that made the air turn heavier. Rayner's voice cracked. "We shouldn't be here." Delaney leaned slightly forward, eyes scanning the newcomer. He didn't order anything, didn't remove his jacket, didn't glance around the room. He simply walked to the far end of the counter and stood with his back to them, staring at the row of empty stools like a man counting ghosts. The waitress greeted him, "Cold night, huh?" But he didn't answer. He remained as still as a statue, shoulders hunched, one hand trembling at his side. Delaney spoke softly without looking away from him. "Who is he?" Rayner swallowed. "The reason your cold case was cold." Her pulse surged. "Name." He shook his head, breath shallow. "If he sees me talking to you, His voice collapsed into silence. Delaney kept her stare locked on the man at the counter. Something was wrong. Something about the stiffness in his posture, the deliberate stillness, the way he pressed one hand against his thigh like he was hiding the tremor of nerves, or something else, something heavier, something metallic. A waitress emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray, calling out to the cook. The newcomer shifted slightly, just enough to tilt his head in the direction of Rayner and Delaney, only for a second, but long enough for Delaney to see his eyes. Cold, calculated. The gaze of someone assessing distance exits potential witnesses. Rayner whispered. He followed me. He must have seen your card. He never lets things go unfinished. Delaney's grip tightened under the table. Say his name. Rayner's lips parted. But before he could answer, the man at the counter raised a hand and tapped twice on the formica surface, sharp, rhythmic, intentional. A signal, or a warning. The diner fell eerily quiet. Even the sizzling from the kitchen seemed to fade. Delaney turned fully toward him, one hand sliding closer to her weapon. "Sir," she called out, voice steady but edged. "Do you need something?" He didn't answer. He didn't turn. He simply tapped the counter again, 2 precise knocks that somehow resonated like the closing of a coffin lid. Rayner inhaled sharply. "That's him. Detective, we have to go." "Not until you give me a name," she shot back. But Rayner wasn't listening. He slid out of the booth, trying to keep his movements small, his body low. The man at the counter didn't turn around yet. His shoulders twitched, as though sensing Rayner's shift in the air. Delaney rose just enough to place herself between them. "Stop," she commanded Rayner. "If you run, I can't protect you." "I shouldn't have come," he whispered, eyes darting to the entrance. "He's been waiting for this." Finally, the man turned. Slow, deliberate. His face emerging from the dim light like a photograph developing in poisoned chemicals. His expression was calm. Disturbingly calm. Mouth curled in a vague smile that didn't reach his eyes. Eyes that seemed too focused on Rayner to notice Delaney's hand on her gun. But he noticed. He saw everything. "Detective," he said softly, voice too smooth for the moment. "You're a long way from Maple Ridge." Her breath stilled. He knew who she was. Rayner backed toward the door. "Don't let him get close," he muttered. "Please. You don't know what he's capable of." Delaney took one step forward, shoulders squared. "Sir, please keep your distance. I'm asking you to stay where you are." But the man didn't listen. He glanced at the waitress who had frozen mid-step, confusion etched across her face. "You should go in the back," he told her gently, almost politely. "It's not safe out here anymore." She blinked unsure. "Sir, what go?" he repeated, voice suddenly sharp. She obeyed. The moment the swinging kitchen door shut behind her, the man's polite facade dropped like a mask falling off. His eyes hardened, calculating angles, exit strategies, a predator sizing up the room. Rayner reached the door, hand trembling as he pushed against it, but the wind outside crashed it back into his chest, slamming him into the wall. He gasped, stumbling. Delaney stepped forward, hand hovering over her weapon. "Stay back," she warned. The man held up both hands in a gesture almost mocking. "Detective, you're making this more dramatic than it needs to be." "You followed him," she snapped. "Why?" A faint smile, "because he talks too much." Rayner shouted. "He took her, detective! He took Emily!" He lunged for the door again, but the man moved with shocking speed for someone his age. In 2 strides, he was across the room, grabbing Rayner by the jacket and slamming him against the window with a force that rattled the panes. Rayner cried out, and Delaney drew her weapon in one fluid motion. "Let him go," she barked. The man didn't look at her. "He doesn't get to run," he murmured, gripping Rayner's collar so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Not again." Delaney leveled her aim. "Release him immediately." Rayner gasped. He used to be a deputy." The words froze the air. A deputy. Blood thundered in Delaney's ears. A deputy who would have known the search patterns, the response times, the blind spots, the evidence protocols. A deputy who would have had access to her car, to the investigation, to the woods, to everything. The man smiled, hearing the silence crack around her. "She's quick," he said, tightening his grip around Rayner's throat. "I like that." Former Deputy Delaney demanded. "Name?" His smile widened. "Funny thing about names. They only matter as long as someone remembers them." Rayner choked out. He changed it after the case left town." The man glanced back at Delaney, eyes darkening. Let him talk, and he'll rewrite history in ways you wouldn't believe. I have your DNA, she countered. Oh, detective. His voice dropped to a chilling calm. No, you don't. Before she could process the words, Rayner twisted desperately, breaking free for half a second. He lunged toward her face, contorted in terror. Don't trust him. Don't trust anything he was. The man struck with brutal precision. A blow to the back of Rayner's skull. Not enough to kill, just enough to silence. Rayner collapsed to the floor. Delaney stepped forward, weapon trained, every muscle taut. Step away from him, now. Slowly, the man lifted his hands again, stepping back from Rayner's unconscious body. Careful, detective, I'm unarmed. But his eyes said otherwise. She took a step closer. Turn around, hands on your head. He obeyed, but deliberately, as though humoring a child. You don't understand the story you've walked into, he said softly. You're chasing ghosts, but the living... He chuckled. The living are much harder to handle. Keep your hands where I can see them. And if I do, he asked, you'll walk out of here in cuffs. He turned his head just enough to give her a chilling half smile. No, detective. If I walk out of here... His voice thinned into a whisper. You'll never solve your cold case. Delaney tightened her aim. You're done running. He inhaled deeply rain-scented air, filling his lungs. But I haven't even started. The diner's lights flickered. The wind outside rose like a warning. And the former deputy, the man who stepped out of the shadows of 1998, vanished from her line of sight in a blur of movement, so fast, so calculated, it felt impossible for a man his age. By the time she blinked, the door was slamming against the wall, rain flooding the threshold, and footprints disappearing into the darkness, leaving Rayner unconscious, leaving the mystery deeper, leaving one truth behind. He wasn't running from the law. He was running towards something else, something waiting, something that began 25 years ago. Rain washed over the empty parking lot as Detective Mara Delaney burst through the diner's doorway, the storm slamming into her like a wall of ice. The figure had already vanished into the night, swallowed by darkness so thick it felt almost alive, as if the forest itself conspired to hide him. She sprinted into the downpour, shoes splashing against oil-slick puddles, eyes scanning for movement, footprints, shifting shadows, anything. But the storm erased every trace within seconds, turning the world into a swirl of water wind and the echo of a man who should have never been able to move that fast. Her pulse hammered against her ribs as she stood beneath the flickering neon sign. The diner lights behind her buzzed fitfully, casting pale slices of color into the rain. She raised her flashlight, sweeping it across the highway. No cars, no footsteps, no lingering silhouette. Just an empty world that seemed to whisper too slow. Inside, Rayner groaned. Delaney rushed back in, kneeling beside him. His breathing was shallow but steady. Blood trickled from the back of his head in a thin, dark line. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck, pulse strong. He blinked slowly, dazed but conscious enough to tremble with fear the moment he realized she was there. He saw us talking, Rayner rasped, voice shaking. You shouldn't have come alone. She steadied him. I'm calling an ambulance. No, he choked, grabbing her wrist weakly. If he knows I'm alive, he'll finish it. He always finishes it. Rayner, you need medical attention. You need answers, he said, breath hitching. And they're not in a hospital. They're in Maple Ridge. The name carried weight, a weight shaped like 25 years of lies, silence, and a town that learned to forget too quickly. Delaney exhaled, torn between procedure and instinct. Procedure said secure the scene, call backup, arrest the suspect. But instinct whispered something different, something colder, older, closer to the marrow of this mystery. This wasn't a standard case, and the man who had just vanished into the night wasn't a standard suspect. He moved like someone who had been running for decades. Someone with experience. Someone who knew the cracks in the system because he once patrolled them. She helped Rayner into the booth and slid her phone into her jacket. She didn't call the ambulance. Not yet. Start talking, she said. He rubbed the back of his neck, wincing. His eyes darted toward the door every few seconds as if the figure might reappear at any moment. Back then, he whispered, he wasn't what he is now. He had a badge, a gun, authority. People trusted him. He was at every briefing, every search, every tearful interview with the parents, who she asked quietly. Rayner shook his head, voice thinning. I only knew his old name, but he changed it after... after what happened. You have to give me something. Rayner looked down at the table, rainwater dripping from his jacket, forming small, trembling pools. I wasn't a good person back then, he said, voice hollow. You've seen my record. I wandered, drifted. I stole things. I slept where I could. I was nobody. And that was why he didn't care about me. Men like him never care about nobodies. He swallowed hard, but I saw something I shouldn't have seen. Delaney's breath stilled. Rayner wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve. I was hitchhiking through Oregon. I slept near the highway. That night, I saw a car slow down. I thought someone was coming to help me, but it wasn't help. His voice trembled. I saw him dragging a girl out of the driver's seat. The room seemed to contract around them. She wasn't moving, Rayner whispered. I think she was unconscious, maybe drugged, maybe worse, but she wasn't fighting. His hands shook violently now. I hid. I didn't want him to see me, but he did. He always did. Delaney leaned in heart-pounding. What did he do? He shined his flashlight right at me, like he'd been expecting someone watching. Rayner stared at his own quivering fingers. I ran until my lungs burned. I didn't stop for miles. And you didn't report it. Rayner laughed bitterly, shaking his head. Report it to who? A deputy. He was the deputy. He was the law. And when I turned up in Maple Ridge the next day, pretending like I hadn't seen anything, he swallowed. He found me, pulled up in his cruiser, told me he'd heard about a drifter skulking around the woods. A chill traced down Delaney's spine. He pulled me aside, Rayner said, voice dropping, and he put his hand on my shoulder like he was giving friendly advice. He told me some things in the woods were dangerous. Some things could consume a man whole. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that says he owns you, and he said if I ever spoke a word, he'd make sure I vanished so completely they'd never find a trace. Delaney felt the storm rumbling outside grow louder, as if the night itself reacted to the confession. That's why I didn't talk, Rayner whispered. Not then. Not when he left town. Not when he changed his name. Not when he kept appearing in places he shouldn't. He pressed a hand against his ribs as if trying to hold himself together. He always knew where I was, what I was doing. It was like he had antennae. Delaney exhaled slowly. The pieces were forming a shape dark, monstrous, but unmistakable. And your DNA in her car? She asked quietly. Rayner closed his eyes. I tried to help her. When he dragged her out, he dropped something. Her hair tie. I picked it up. Don't know why. Maybe because it felt like proof. He shook his head helplessly. Maybe I was just scared. But when he came after me, I panicked. I ran. I must have brushed against the seat when I dropped it back. The diner felt colder now, as if the temperature had fallen through the floor. Delaney stood. He'll be back. We need to move. Rayner's eyes snapped open. You don't understand, detective. He's not just a man anymore. He knows the woods, knows the dark. He's lived inside this case for 25 years, and he won't stop now. His voice cracked. He's hunting. She grabbed him by the arm. Get up. We're leaving. But as she helped him to his feet, the storm outside shifted. A new sound crashed through the rain tires on wet asphalt. Slow, deliberate, heavy. A vehicle pulled up just beyond the neon glow. Headlights flared against the fogged windows, flooding the diner with harsh white light. Rayner froze. Oh, God, he whispered. He found us. He always finds us. Delaney drew her weapon. The headlights stayed still, engine idling. Then the passenger door opened with a metallic click that echoed through the air like a warning. A boot touched the ground. Another silhouette stepped out, not the same one as before, taller, broader, moving with a methodical confidence that didn't belong to a startled accomplice or a panicked fugitive. Someone else. Another piece of the past stepping into the present. Who is that? Delaney murmured. Rayner shook his head violently. I don't know. He never had help. He never... But his voice faltered. Because the silhouette walked slowly toward the diner, one hand hidden inside a jacket pocket, head bowed against the rain. He reached the door, grabbed the handle, turned it. And as the door swung open, Delaney lifted her weapon. The man stepped inside. Rainwater slid from the brim of his hat. His eyes scanned the room with chilling precision. And then he spoke, voice calm, steady, practiced. Detective Delaney. She didn't answer. I need you to come with me, he said, holding up a badge. There's been an incident in Maple Ridge. Rayner's knees buckled. because the badge said Oregon State Patrol. But the face? The face belonged to the last person anyone expected to walk into a cold case reborn after 25 years. A face that belonged to someone who had every reason to keep the truth buried. And Delaney felt it instantly. Something was very, very wrong. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt not with the subtle shift of unease, but with the jarring snap of something profoundly wrong sliding into place. Detective Mara Delaney stared at the badge, rainwater glistening on its polished surface under the diner's flickering neon sign, and felt a chill deeper than the storm outside seep into her bones. The man holding it stood perfectly still, posture rigid, expression unreadable. His uniform bore the insignia of the Oregon State Patrol pressed with precise creases that suggested meticulous habits. But it wasn't the badge or the uniform that made the room contract around her, it was the eyes. Cold, controlled, and far too familiar with the concept of performing authority. He stepped forward, boots grinding against the linoleum. "Detective Delaney," he repeated, voice steady, unhurried, as if the storm outside and the unconscious man at her feet were irrelevant details in a much larger narrative he already knew by heart. "We need to leave. There's been an incident in Maple Ridge." Rayner clutched the back of the booth to steady himself, his gaze flicking between Delaney and the newcomer. Fear hollowed his cheeks. "Don't go with him," he whispered hoarsely. "Detective, please, don't." The trooper turned his head slightly. "Sir, I need you to remain calm. EMS is on the way." Delaney's pulse sharpened. She hadn't called EMS. Her grip tightened around her weapon. "Who reported the incident?" The trooper blinked once. "Dispatch received the call. They asked me to locate you immediately." "Dispatch doesn't know I'm here." A faint smile crept across his face, not wide enough to be friendly, but tight enough to be rehearsed. "Detective, there's no time for this. We need to move." Rayner shook his head violently. "He's lying. They're all lying. He's one of them." Delaney steadied her breath. "Name." The trooper paused, just long enough. "Officer Grant Holloway," he said. The diner seemed to exhale all at once, lights dimming as thunder rolled in the distance. Holloway. She'd seen that name in the Carson file buried deep in the old personnel logs, tied to a different county, a different department. A transfer listed 2 months after Emily disappeared. No misconduct noted. No red flags, just a quiet relocation that at the time seemed administrative. A ripple in the records. But the man standing in front of her was no simple ripple. He watched her carefully, as if measuring each micro-expression. "Detective, you're armed and tense, I understand, but you're going to lower your weapon now." Delaney didn't move. "Why were you looking for me?" Holloway's jaw flexed. "The incident in Maple Ridge involves a body, a young woman. Found this morning. We believe—" He hesitated, just enough to sound human. "We believe it may be connected to the Carson case." Rayner's breath hitched. His knees almost buckled. Delaney's stomach twisted not with shock, but with suspicion. The timing, the location, the impossibility of coincidence. It felt orchestrated, as if someone were pulling strings in the dark, nudging her toward an outcome they'd already anticipated. She didn't lower her weapon. "Tell me exactly what happened." Holloway's gaze hardened with a subtle shift, like a door, quietly locking. "Detective," he said, voice softening into false patience, "I'm giving you an opportunity to cooperate. Don't make this difficult. Answer the question." His eyes flicked to Rayner. "Is he interfering with your judgment?" Delaney stepped slightly sideways to block Rayner from view. "You're avoiding specifics." He exhaled through his nose, annoyed but disciplined. "Fine. We received a call before dawn. A hiker found a body near the ridge. Female, late teens. Clothing consistent with late 90s. It may be Emily Carson." Rayner's hand flew to his mouth. "No," he whispered. "No, he's lying. He's setting you up, detective." But Delaney's mind sharpened. A body appearing after 25 years, right when she discovered Rayner's DNA, right when the former deputy re-entered the picture. It was too clean, too convenient, too deliberate. Someone wasn't just reacting to her investigation. They were shaping it. "Show me identification," she demanded. Holloway's expression flickered, just a subtle tightening around the eyes, barely perceptible, but enough to confirm her instinct. He reached slowly into his jacket, retrieving a leather wallet. He opened it, flashing his ID. It looked real. Too real. Almost perfect. Rayner staggered behind her. Detective, look at the edges. Look, he's used this before. He's used the same badge in 3 states I've seen him. Holloway snapped the ID shut. Enough. Delaney kept her aim locked. The diner's air grew thick, suffocating, as if the walls were inching closer. Outside, the headlights of the mysterious vehicle remained on engine, rumbling through the storm. Holloway spoke again, voice slick with authority. If you don't come with me willingly, Detective, I'll have to report you as non-compliant. That complicates everything. Delaney frowned. You don't outrank me. His smile returned small, predatory. Tonight, I do. Rayner let out a strangled sound. He doesn't need you to believe him, Detective, just to follow him. Delaney took a slow step back. Rayner stays with me. No, Holloway said firmly. He comes with me. He's a witness in a state investigation. He's my witness. Not anymore. For a moment, silence filled every corner of the diner. Then Rayner broke it with a whisper so faint it barely existed. He's not the deputy, but he's connected. They knew each other. They worked together. Maybe not officially, but I've seen them. I've seen. Holloway moved. A shift of weight. A subtle pivot. A flicker of intention crossing his eyes like a storm cloud darkening the horizon. Delaney braced. Then, the diner lights snapped to full brightness, humming with electricity. A loud metallic crash echoed from outside, followed by the screech of tires. Holloway spun toward the sound. Rayner grabbed Delaney's sleeve. He's here. The real one. They're together. The door exploded inward. Wind and rain blasted into the diner. And the former deputy, the shadow from the gas station footage, the man who moved like a ghost wearing skin, strode into the room, dripping water face, twisted with rage that seemed decades old. Holloway stepped back. You weren't supposed to, but the deputy cut him off with a voice dark and cold. You're losing control, Grant. She wasn't meant to see you yet. Delaney's breath caught. Yet. Rayner collapsed into the booth, whispering incoherently. Holloway raised a hand as if to calm the storm, but the deputy ignored him, eyes locked solely on Delaney, the way a predator locks onto the last witness of a crime. She's too close, he muttered. She's already seen too much. Delaney raised her weapon, higher chest, tight, hands where I can see them, both of you. The deputy's lips curled into a smile devoid of warmth. You think this started with Emily? He asked softly. You think this is about one girl? Holloway looked uneasy now, glancing toward the door, calculating options. The deputy leaned forward, dripping rainwater onto the floor. This didn't start in 1998, Detective. This started long before that. And you... His eyes' sharpened voice dropping to a haunting whisper. You walked right into the center of it. Lightning tore across the sky. Thunder shook the windows. And in that heartbeat of blinding white light, Delaney saw something in the deputy's expression she couldn't categorize, something between triumph and terror. As if whatever hunted Emily Carson 25 years ago wasn't finished, and wasn't human, and wasn't alone. For a suspended second, the diner seemed to hang weightless between past and present, every raindrop frozen mid-air, every breath trapped inside the chests of those still upright. Detective Mara Delaney felt something primal swell in her lungs, an instinct older than training, older than fear, a warning that what stood before her wasn't just a man, or a fugitive, or a former deputy with a fractured past. It was something carved from the darker edges of human nature, something that had learned to hide inside systems, meant to protect something that had worn authority like a mask for so long it no longer knew where the mask stopped and the monster began. The deputy took another slow step forward. Holloway flinched as though even he wasn't immune to the heavy, suffocating air radiating off the man beside him. Rainwater dripped from the deputy's hair, sliding down his cheek like melting ice, but his eyes, those chilling, predatory eyes, never left Delaney. Put the weapon down, Holloway said, but his voice trembled now, the first crack in his manufactured composure. Detective, we're losing control of the situation. Delaney steadied her breathing. She could feel Rayner shaking behind her, almost convulsing. His voice rose in a broken whisper, repeating the same words like a mantra, unraveling. He wasn't alone. He wasn't alone. He was never alone. The deputy smirked, turning slightly toward Rayner. He remembers. That's the problem. Delaney tightened her aim. Hands on your head. You still think this is a negotiation? The deputy said calmly. It isn't. Without another word, he lifted his jacket. Not fast, not threateningly, but with the deliberate slowness of a man revealing a truth he wanted the room to absorb. Delaney braced for a weapon, but what she saw instead sent a jolt of cold dread down her spine. Pinned inside the lining of his coat were 2 badges. One from Maple Ridge Sheriff's Department, dated 1998, and one from a county farther south, dated years later. A pattern, a trail, a career built on movement, shifting jurisdictions like a predator following seasonal migrations. Holloway stepped forward as though trying to salvage authority. Detective Delaney, you need to stand down. You're interfering with state. Stop talking, the deputy snapped without turning. You've already said too much. There was no respect in the command, no hierarchy, only control. Delaney's voice dropped to a knife edge. Rayner says you changed your name. The deputy's mouth twitched. I've changed many things. What was it? In 1998, lightning flashed outside, illuminating his face in harsh white. For a split second, Delaney saw something feral in his expression, something fractured and hungry. An echo of the night Emily Carson vanished. Then he spoke. Cole Matthews. Rayner collapsed to his knees. Delaney's pulse rocketed. Matthews. She remembered it now, buried in the logs, mentioned only twice. A patrol deputy who resigned suddenly a month after Emily disappeared. Official file said family relocation. No misconduct, no complaints, no investigation. Too clean. Holloway shifted uncomfortably, rain dripping from his hat brim. We need to get moving, he muttered. This isn't secure. Matthews turned on him with a stare so sharp it wiped the color from Holloway's face. You were supposed to contain this, not complicate it. I did contain it, Holloway insisted weakly, until Delaney cut in. Until I, looked at the evidence you missed, or the evidence you hid? Holloway's jaw tensed. Matthews laughed softly. It wasn't a sane sound. It wasn't even a human sound. It was the sound of a man who believed he was inevitable. You keep acting like you discovered something he said? Like you pulled back a curtain. His eyes narrowed. Detective, there is no curtain. There's only what people choose not to see. Rayner whimpered. He took others he choked, not just Emily, before her, after her. Delaney's entire body went cold. How many? Matthews tilted his head, considering the question as though calculating stars in a dark sky. Enough. Give me a number. He smiled. You wouldn't believe it. The diner shifted again, not physically, but in atmosphere. The walls felt too small. The air tasted metallic. Even the neon outside seemed to pulse slower, dimmer, as if afraid. Delaney's voice dropped. Why Emily? Matthews' gaze darkened. She wasn't the plan. She was the interruption. He took a step closer. Delaney didn't step back. Someone else was meant to be on that road that night. Someone who fit the pattern. He paused, eyes gleaming. But Emily saw something she shouldn't have. And witness is just another word for liability. Rayner let out a shuddering sob. Delaney's heart pounded in her throat. And you hid behind the investigation. Hid Matthews scoffed. No detective, I guided it. Every search party, every map, every false trail, every interview that led nowhere. His voice dipped into something almost reverent. I shaped the silence. The words sliced deeper than any confession. Holloway took a small step back, suddenly paling. Cole, stop? Matthews didn't stop. Did you know, he said, addressing Delaney again, that people look straight through uniforms? They don't question them. They obey them. They trust them. A badge isn't a symbol of authority, it's camouflage. Delaney felt her grip tightening involuntarily around her weapon. You removed the body, she said. That's why we never found her. Matthews smiled. Bodies are easy to move, memories are easier. Rayner shook violently. Don't listen to him, detective. He's twisting it. Yes, Matthews said lightly. Twisting is something of a specialty. Lightning cracked again, flooding the room with a white pulse. And in that moment of brief illumination, Delaney saw the second detail she'd been too focused to notice. Matthew's sleeve torn at the seam, something metal glinting underneath. Not a weapon. A restraint. A shackle. Her breath caught. What's under your sleeve? She asked quietly. Matthew's expression froze. Holloway stiffened. Rayner stopped breathing altogether. Delaney stepped forwards, weapon raised. Show me your arm. Matthews straightened. No. Show it. His jaw twitched. You don't want to see it. Now. Matthews exhaled slowly. Detective, There are things in this world you should not pull into the light. She didn't blink. Lift your sleeve. Holloway muttered something under his breath. Fear, panic, something like regret. Matthews lifted his arm. The sleeve peeled back with a wet fabric sound, and beneath it, cold steel dug into pale skin. Not a handcuff. Not police issue. A manacle. Old. Heavy. Bolted. With burn marks surrounding it, and etched into the metal, deep, deliberate, ceremonial, was a symbol Delaney didn't recognize but felt in her blood like an old wound reopening. Matthews looked at her, voice suddenly raw, stripped of the manic confidence. I wasn't alone that night, he whispered. I never have been. Something slammed into the diner roof above them, hard like a body dropping from the sky. Dust drifted down. Rayner screamed. Holloway staggered backward, face white. Matthews tilted his head calmly as if hearing an old friend arrive. Delaney steadied her weapon, every muscle screaming. What was that? She demanded. Matthews smiled again, gentle, almost pitying. The reason Emily never came home. A second impact struck the roof louder. A third near the door. The lights flickered violently. Then the ceiling above the entrance buckled. Something moved in the shadows overhead. Something large. Something dragging claws. Rayner sobbed, It's him, it's him, it's him. Matthews looked at Delaney. He's not here for you, detective. His smile widened. He's here for Rayner. The roof cracked. The lights died. And the diner fell into darkness. The darkness didn't fall gently. It hit like a collapsing lung, crushing every shape, every sound, every breath into a suffocating void. Detective Mara Delaney felt the world disappear around her in a single violent blink. The neon glow extinguished, the hum of lights swallowed, leaving only the storm's distant roar and the frantic pulse hammering in her veins. Her fingers tightened around the grip of her weapon knuckles, white muscles, coiled eyes, straining against the pitch-black air that suddenly carried weight movement, presence. The ceiling groaned. A scattering of dust drifted down, brushing her cheek like the touch of something that shouldn't have hands. Rayner sobbed in the dark, a desperate, choking sound. He's here, he's right above us, oh God! Detective, please, please! Quiet Delaney hissed barely audible breath, thin as wire. Holloway stumbled somewhere to her left, boots scraping. Cole, what did you bring? What did you bring into this? Control yourself, Matthews murmured calmly, like a man commenting on the weather, rather than the creature or person or nightmare crawling across the roof. He reacts to panic. Delaney's heart lurched. She repeated under her breath, what do you mean? As if summoned by the question, something heavy shifted above them. Boards strained. Nails whined. The thing moved not like an animal, not like a human, but like both fast, deliberate crawling with a precision that came from knowing every inch of darkness intimately. Delaney swallowed hard. Her voice was steady, but only barely. Matthews, tell me what's on that roof. He inhaled slowly, the sound too calm, too cool. Not what, who. Rayner whimpered. He's not human. A low, dragging sound scraped across the ceiling metal on wood, like chains being pulled by something with too many limbs. Delaney's grip tightened so hard her fingers tingled. Rayner, she whispered urgently, where is he directly above us? Rayner pressed himself against the booth body, curling into itself. You can't stop him, detective. You can't shoot him. He doesn't die. He doesn't ever die. Delaney ignored the tremor creeping up her spine. Matthews, answer me. Matthews exhaled as if savoring the tension. I told you. I wasn't alone that night. Something slammed into the roof again, closer this time, followed by the splintering crack of wood tearing under pressure. Holloway gasped. Cole, control it. You don't control him, Matthews replied, almost amused. You survive him. Delaney took a small step back, weapon tracking the ceiling through the dark. Rayner, she said quietly, what did you actually see that night on the highway? Rayner made a strangled noise, not fear, but memory dragging its nails across his mind. I saw the deputy dragging Emily, but he wasn't alone. Something was helping him. Something that didn't walk right. Something that stayed just out of the headlights. His breath hitched. It wasn't human. Delaney's jaw tightened. You're telling me someone else was there? No, Rayner whispered. Not someone. Something. The diner trembled as a beam overhead bowed inward. Dust billowing in a choking cloud. The creature or presence scuttled to the far corner, then back toward the center as if deciding where to strike. Its weight shifted boards, snapping underfoot. Holloway swore under his breath. "It's not supposed to come inside. Cole, you said." Matthews chuckled. "I said a great many things." Delaney's voice cut through the dark. "If that thing comes through the ceiling, I will shoot it." "He'll be flattered," Matthews replied. A long, slithering drag crept along the rafters, slow and taunting. Rayner clutched Delaney's arm blindly. "Detective, please, he came for me. He always comes for me. Don't let him." Another impact shook the ceiling. Wood splintered. A chunk of plaster fell at Delaney's feet. She stepped forward, gun raised, voice a razor in the dark. "Matthews, look at me." Matthews turned his head, barely visible in the faint glow spilling from the storm outside. His eyes glinted unnaturally bright, almost reflective, like a predator's. Delaney hissed, "What is that thing?" Matthews tilted his head. "The consequence of old promises. Speak clearly." "I owe him," Matthews said softly. "He keeps my secrets. I keep his." A sudden violent crack overhead. Rayner screamed. The roof caved inward in a rain of wood dust and debris. Something massive dropped between the booths, a dark shape, hulking and twisted limbs, bent at angles too unnatural for any creature Delaney had ever studied. She didn't see its face at first, only the outline of a torso broader than a man's, and the burn of eyes glinting like embers in the dark. Delaney didn't wait. She pulled the trigger. The gunshot exploded like lightning trapped inside four walls. The muzzle flash lit the room in a strobe of blue-white. The creature recoiled not from pain, but from the light itself. It shrieked a guttural, bone-deep sound that rattled the windows, then vaulted backward into the deeper dark near the ordering counter, moving with impossible speed. Holloway fell backward, crashing into a table. Matthews didn't flinch, didn't move at all. Rayner covered his ears. "It hates the light used. The light used the light." Delaney fired again, aiming for movement, another muzzle flash, another blinding burst, and for a split second the creature's silhouette snapped into view. Tall? Twisted. Skin stretched too tightly over a frame that seemed to pulse beneath the surface. And a metal shackle around its left wrist matching Matthews exactly. Delaney's breath caught. What the hell? The creature lunged. Delaney dove to the floor as claws tore a gash across the booth where her head had been seconds earlier. Wood splintered. Vinyl ripped. The creature vanished again in the dark, its breath rasping like steel dragged across concrete. Matthews finally moved slowly, stepping back toward the wall, a dark smile on his lips. He's been waiting 25 years for this. Delaney snarled, "What is he?" Matthews answered simply, "The insurance policy." A crash erupted near the window as the creature hurled itself sideways, slamming into a metal coat rack that screeched across the floor. The creature circled, stalking, waiting for another muzzle flash to reveal its shape. Delaney's breath came in sharp pulls. She couldn't waste bullets. She needed light. Her eyes darted toward the neon sign outside, still flickering faintly, toward the electrical panel behind the counter, toward the emergency lighting she'd seen earlier near the kitchen. She made her choice. "Rayner," she whispered urgently. "When I move, crawl. Don't run. Crawl." Rayner nodded, trembling violently. Holloway groaned somewhere to her left, semi-conscious. Matthews watched like an audience member enjoying a macabre performance. Delaney lunged sideways. The creature struck instantly fast enough she felt the shift of air at her back, but she rolled fired upward, blinding it for a heartbeat with the muzzle flash. The creature reeled, claws slicing the air. Delaney reached the counter, scrambled over it, slammed her boot into the emergency lighting switch. A burst of harsh white filled the diner, flickering, stuttering, but bright enough to carve the shadows open. The creature screeched, rearing back, its skin blistering under the sudden brilliance. Its face twisted, contorted, something once human buried beneath layers of scar tissue twitched in agony. Matthews winced, turning his face away, jaw clenched. Rayner sobbed in relief. The light, keep it on him. Delaney steadied her weapon with both hands, the emergency light glaring off the gun barrel. The creature backed against the far wall, claws digging trenches in the wood, shuddering violently. Matthews shouted, "Don't kill him!" Delaney fired. The bullet struck the creature's shoulder. Black fluid hissed, steaming in the cold air. The creature roared, swinging wildly. But Delaney was already moving. She aimed again, center mass. And before Matthews could reach her, before Rayner could scream, before the creature could lunge, she pulled the trigger. The creature collapsed. A wet, thunderous impact that shook the entire diner floor. A sound like air leaving a corpse decades too old to breathe. The emergency light flickered, then steadied. Rayner sagged against the booth, sobbing with relief. Holloway stared wide-eyed, unable to process the reality in front of him. Delaney lowered her weapon chest, heaving. Matthews stood completely still. His expression wasn't anger, or horror, or fear. It was sorrow. "You made a mistake," he whispered. Delaney aimed the gun at him. "Don't move." He looked up at the ceiling through the gaping hole the creature had torn. He wasn't the only one. A cold wind rolled through the diner, carrying something faint. A sound. No many sounds. Footsteps. Multiple. Crawling. Shifting. Descending through the storm. Delaney raised her weapon again, heart pounding. Rayner's eyes widened with terror. "No," he whispered. "Not one creature. Not one nightmare. Not one shackle. But many." The roof groaned. Dust fell. The storm howled. And Matthews smiled with hollow triumph. "You didn't end the threat," he murmured. "You summoned the rest." The ceiling above them cracked. Once. Twice. A chorus of claws scraped along the beams, and the darkness breathed. For a moment, the diner felt like the lung of a dying animal, expanding, contracting, struggling to hold in the terror swelling against its walls. The roof groaned overhead as though it were breathing wooden beams, bending under shifting weight dust, spiraling down like ash from a wildfire approaching its crescendo. Detective Mara Delaney felt her heartbeat stutter, then lurch into a brutal rhythm, every instinct inside her waking up with a single message pulsing through her veins: run, no fight, no survive. Rayner was frozen, wide-eyed, trembling so violently the booth creaked beneath him. Holloway lay half-sprawled across the floor, dazed, staring up at the gaping dark wound in the ceiling where one creature had fallen, and where others now seemed to move. Matthews stood near the counter, with an eerie stillness, his manacled arm glinting under the emergency light, his expression carved into something between grief and inevitable satisfaction. Delaney didn't lower her weapon. "How many are up there?" she demanded, voice-taut rain and sweat mixing on her forehead. Matthews didn't blink. "Enough to end this." "End what?" "The silence," he said almost gently. "The silence you just broke." A chorus of scraping claws dragged across the rafters above them, heavy and uneven, like bodies fighting for space, for air, for hunger. The boards groaned. A beam cracked. Debris sprinkled down. Something large and heavy shifted directly above where Holloway lay. Delaney's voice sliced the air. "Holloway, move now!" He rolled just as a claw punched through the ceiling where his chest had been. Wood splintered shards raining down, dust exploding in a choking cloud. Holloway screamed. Rayner screamed. Delaney fired upward. The muzzle flash illuminated the underside of the creature, its skull-like face split open in a shriek of fury, eyes glowing sickly white skin, stretched too thin across a frame that looked stitched together from shadows. The bullet slammed into its jaw, forcing it back with a blast of bile-dark blood that sizzled as it hit the floor. The ceiling shook again, footsteps pounding, more claws cutting into the boards. They weren't hiding anymore. They were descending. Delaney leaped over the counter. "Rayner, get down Holloway on your feet now." Holloway scrambled toward her, slipping on blood. "Shoot them. Shoot all of them." "Do you see me with infinite ammo?" she barked. The boards above Matthews cracked, and another creature dropped partway through the ceiling limbs, dangling grotesquely clawed hands reaching, its snarled eyes locking on Rayner. Rayner shrieked. Matthews stepped toward it, arm raised in some twisted gesture of recognition. The creature paused just long enough for Delaney to fire again. The bullet struck the creature's throat. It fell back with a sickening wet thud, claws scraping at the rafters as it struggled to regain footing. Matthew's jaw tightened. "You're making things worse," Delaney snapped explain. "Right now." He gestured toward the creatures overhead. "They were bound to me, controlled, contained. You killed one. The others believe they're being attacked." Delaney's eyes narrowed. "You're telling me these things answer to you?" Matthews gave a humorless smile. "Not answer, but listen. They were conditioned to my presence." And now he gestured to the emergency lights. "You burned away their restraint. You're insane. You're blind." Something hit the roof so hard the lights flickered. A body-sized shadow slithered across the ceiling. Then another, and another. Rayner clawed at the booth, trying to pull himself upright. "Detective," he sobbed, You have to stop them. You have to stop him. Holloway staggered beside Delaney, bleeding from his forehead. We need backup. We need units. We need... No signal. Delaney cut him off sharply. The storm killed reception and the lines are dead. Matthews tilted his head. Not the storm. What? The interference. His smile deepened. You think these creatures hunt blindly. They disrupt frequencies. It's instinct. Delaney didn't have time to process that. The ceiling split open. 3 creatures dropped into the diner at once. They landed like bodies thrown from skyscrapers, legs bending unnaturally, claws digging into tile heads, snapping toward the nearest source of heat. Raynor. Raynor screamed so loudly it pierced the storm outside. Delaney fired twice, moving fast, rolling over a table as claws sliced through the air inches from her spine. A bullet caught one creature in the side of the head. It fell with a guttural roar, collapsing against the stools. The second creature lunged at Holloway. Holloway tripped backward into the row of booths, raising an arm to shield himself. The creature's claws slashed, tearing deep lines across his sleeve and skin. He screamed, kicking wildly. Delaney spun and fired one shot, then another, each muzzle flash lighting the diner like bursts of lightning. The creature staggered, but didn't drop. Holloway rolled beneath the table as it swung again. The third creature moved differently, slowly, cautiously, head twitching, sniffing. It didn't attack Delaney or Holloway. Its eyes fixed on Raynor, on the witness, on the man who had seen too much. Raynor pressed himself against the booth, sobbing uncontrollably. No, 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 please! Matthews shouted, Don't kill him, not yet! The creature ignored him. Delaney raised her weapon. Matthews moved. He jumped between them, like a shield grabbing Delaney's wrist with shocking strength, twisting the weapon aside. The gunshot tore through the diner's open doorway instead of the creature's skull. Raynor screamed louder. Delaney snarled, Get off me! But Matthews held fast. You kill him, he hissed, and the others turned completely feral. They're already feral. You have no idea what feral looks like. Another beam above them cracked. More movement, more shadows, more claws. A low rumbling sound filled the air like distant thunder, but wrong, too organic, too synchronized. A pack. A whole pack. Delaney kicked Matthews hard enough to knock him back, wrenching free of his grip. She grabbed Holloway, yanking him toward the counter. Raynor, move. Raynor stumbled out of the booth, tripping forward. The creature chasing him lunged, claws extended. Delaney fired again, striking its shoulder. It collapsed, shrieking limbs thrashing. Raynor collapsed into Delaney's grip. She dragged him behind the counter, breath coming in harsh bursts. Holloway staggered beside her, clutching his bleeding arm. We're going to die in here. Not yet, Delaney growled. Matthews stepped forward, a blood on his face from where she'd kicked him, expression eerily calm. You can't win this. They're older than this town. Older than law. Older than memory. Delaney snapped, Then why control them? I don't control them, he corrected. We coexist. They need someone, a liaison, a shepherd, a sickening smile, a partner. You and those things took Emily. We took many things. You murdered her. Matthew's smile faded. Emily wasn't meant to die. She wasn't the target, but she fought. Harder than most. Brave girl. Wrong night. Delaney's stomach twisted. Above them, the roof trembled again. Claws scraped. More weight. More shadows. Holloway whispered, There are too many. And suddenly, Delaney realized something chilling. The creatures weren't descending randomly. They were surrounding the diner. Circling. Coordinating. Waiting. Matthews noticed the shift in her expression. They only wait before a mass strike. Delaney felt ice settle in her lungs. A what? He stepped closer, voice lowering. They overwhelm, all at once. How many? He smiled darkly. All of them. Holloway grabbed Delaney's arm. We have to run. Raynor shook violently. Run where they surround everything. They know every inch of these woods. They don't let people leave. We don't need the woods, Delaney said sharply. We need the car. The car, Holloway stammered. The car won't get past them. Delaney's jaw clenched. It's the only chance we have. A deep cracking sound echoed outside. It wasn't thunder, but wood snapping under immense force. The creatures weren't just on the roof. They were gathering in the tree line. Dozens, maybe more. Delaney raised her weapon. Raynor sobbed. Holloway trembled. Matthews smiled faintly like someone watching a play he'd seen many times. Then the deputy whispered the final warning as the storm surged. When they descend, Detective... His eyes glinted. They don't leave survivors. The diner lights flickered once, twice, then died. The creatures screamed. and the night exploded. When the lights died, the world didn't simply go dark, it detonated into chaos. A wall of sound erupted from every direction at once. Claws raking the siding windows, rattling under the force of bodies slamming against the walls. Guttural shrieks ripping through the night like something ancient, clawing its way back into existence. Detective Mara Delaney felt the diner tremble beneath her boots, the tiles vibrating with the weight of creatures gathering outside, circling, readying themselves for the mass strike Matthews had promised, with a calmness that now felt like prophecy. Rayner collapsed behind the counter, hands over his ears, rocking back and forth as though trying to disappear into the floor. Holloway pressed against the base of the Friar eyes, flicking wildly between Delaney and the broken windows, his breath hitching like a man drowning in air. Matthews stood in the middle of the ruined diner, the emergency light briefly illuminating his torn sleeve and the manacle anchored to his arm like a relic. In the darkness, his silhouette looked almost skeletal. Part man, part symbol, part architect of the nightmare converging around them. Delaney steadied her grip on her weapon, her mind racing so fast it felt like a series of detonations. They didn't have minutes, maybe not even seconds. The first creature slammed against the boarded window near the booth, sending cracks spiderwebbing across the thin glass. The second crashed onto the roof claws, digging into the sagging beams. The third raked its claws across the metal siding, leaving deep screeching gouges that vibrated through the air like a warning from hell itself. Holloway shouted, "They're surrounding us," but his voice barely cut through the noise. Another shriek outside, high, furious, hungry, echoed through the woods. Delaney grabbed Rayner by the jacket, pulling him upright. "Move." Rayner's whole body shook. "Where, Detective? They're everywhere. Everywhere." "We're not dying in a diner," Delaney snapped. "The car. Now." Holloway staggered to his feet, clutching his bleeding arm. "We'll never make it." "We'll make it if we run." Matthews watched her, with those cold, knowing eyes, letting the storm fill the silence between them. "Detective," he said softly, "you can't outrun them." "You'd be amazed what I can do," she said through clenched teeth. The wall beside them exploded inward. Its splinters of wood flew like shrapnel. A creature clawed its way through, forcing its massive frame through the hole. Its eyes glowed white in the dark jaw, splitting open in a scream that shook the floor. Delaney fired. The muzzle flash lit the creature's face for a fraction of a second. Skin stretched too tight over bone, jaw unhinged wider than humanly possible, a line of teeth like splintered stone. The bullet tore through its cheek, black blood erupting in a sizzling spray, but it didn't fall. It lunged. "Go!" Delaney roared, shoving Rayner toward the back hallway. Holloway followed, stumbling, grimacing. They sprinted down the narrow corridor, past the kitchen, slipping on grease and shattered glass. The door at the end was chained shut from the outside. Holloway cursed, ramming his shoulder into it. Delaney holstered her weapon and kicked hard, once, twice, on the third strike. The chain snapped the door, flying open with a deafening clang. Cold rain blasted them as they tumbled into the alley behind the diner. The wind howled like something alive. The tree line swayed violently, shadows shifting inside the darkness like something massing for a hunt. Rayner screamed and pointed. 3 creatures were emerging from the woods, limbs bent, claws dragging furrows through the mud. Delaney yanked him toward the parking lot. "Run now." The creatures hissed, then charged. Delaney pulled her gun again and fired toward the ground, sending a flash of light slicing through the rain. The creatures recoiled for a split second, just long enough to buy them inches of survival. They sprinted across the gravel lot, shoes, skidding breath tearing through their lungs. Holloway stumbled again. Delaney grabbed his jacket, dragging him forward with a strength she didn't know she had left. Behind them, claws tore into the diner's outer wall, followed by a sound like metal crumpling under impossible weight. Rayner gasped, "The car! Where's the car?" There, Delaney snapped, pointing to the stand near the far edge of the lot, its headlights barely visible through sheets of rain. A creature launched from the tree line, hitting the ground so hard mud sprayed across the asphalt. It skidded, pivoted, and lunged again. Delaney fired. The muzzle flash froze the world. The creature flinched, stumbling in pain, but kept coming. Holloway reached the car first, fumbling for the handle. "It's locked." "Break the window," Delaney shouted. He rammed his elbow into the glass. It cracked but didn't shatter. The creature surged forward. Delaney sprinted the last few steps, grabbing Holloway's arm. "Move!" She swung her weapon hard, smashing the handle of the gun against the glass. It shattered. They dove inside, pulling Raynor in after them. Delaney slammed the door. Holloway scrambled across the seat, hands shaking as he jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered. The creature slammed into the hood. The car jolted violently. "Start the car," Delaney screamed, bracing Raynor with her arm. Holloway yanked the key, grinding the starter. The engine coughed. Another creature hit the side claws, tearing into the frame. The metal groaned in agony. The car rocked. Holloway cried out, "It won't!" "Try again." He did. The engine roared to life. The headlights flared through the rain, and what they illuminated froze even Delaney's heart. More creatures, at least 8, emerging from the tree line like shadows peeling themselves off the night limbs, contorting eyes glowing with the same predatory hunger. Raynor sobbed, curling into himself. "We're dead! We're dead!" Delaney grabbed the steering wheel with her left handgun still in her right. Drive, Holloway. Floor it. Holloway slammed his foot down. The car shot forward. The creature on the hood screeched, claws carving deep furrows in the metal as it slid off. Another creature lunged, crashing onto the trunk. The tires fishtailed across the wet gravel. "Keep going," Delaney shouted. The car hit the main road, tires squealing as they surged forward. Rain slashed across the windshield wipers, struggling violently. Raynor pressed his hands against his ears, rocking. "They're behind us. They're so fast they're behind." Delaney twisted in her seat, raising her weapon through the busted window. The headlights caught them. 4 creatures sprinting after the car, their limbs bending unnaturally, hands clawing at the asphalt. Their speed was horrifying, impossibly fast, like something that didn't obey the rules of physics or bone or breath. Delaney fired at the nearest one. The bullet struck its shoulder. It staggered, but didn't fall. It lunged again. Holloway shouted, "What are they?" Delaney didn't answer. She didn't know. She only knew they could die if they didn't outrun them. The road curved. The car skidded. One creature leapt onto the trunk, its claws puncturing the metal. The rear window cracked. Raynor screamed. Delaney fired point blank through the back windshield. The muzzle flash lit the rain in eerie bursts. The bullet tore through the creature's neck. It fell, rolling across the pavement in a twisted tumble. But 2 more replaced it instantly. Holloway was shaking violently. "We can't outrun them. We can't." "Yes, we can," Delaney snarled. "Stay on the road. Don't slow down. Don't." A creature leapt at the passenger side. Delaney fired. The bullet struck its jaw. It crashed onto the wet asphalt. Another leapt. Delaney fired again. Her clip ran empty. She cursed under her breath, reaching for a spare she didn't have. Raynor sobbed harder. A creature slammed into the roof. Another onto the trunk. Another onto the right door. The car veered wildly. Holloway shouted, "I can't, they're on every side." "Keep driving." The roof dented inward as claws punctured through inches from Raynor's head. Delaney grabbed him, pulling him down. The car skidded sideways. The creatures shrieked. The rain roared. Then, a shadow appeared in the middle of the road ahead. A figure, standing, waiting. Matthews, soaked, motionless, arm raised. Delaney's blood iced. "Don't stop," she yelled. But Holloway's eyes widened in terror. "He'll kill us." "No, keep going." Too late. Holloway slammed the brakes. The car skidded, spinning, fishtailing on wet pavement. The creatures leapt. The rear window exploded. Raynor screamed. Delaney shielded him. The car spun, slammed sideways into an embankment, and rolled. Once, twice, 3 times, metal screamed. Glass shattered. Bodies slammed into walls. Rain poured in through every opening. When the world stopped moving, everything went still. The only sound was the storm, and the faint, ragged breath of something moving outside, very slowly, very deliberately. Something that survived the crash. Something approaching the overturned car. Delaney coughed, forcing her eyes open, blood running down her temple. Raynor was unconscious. Holloway was moaning. Delaney tried to reach her gun. A shadow fell over the broken window. A claw curled around the frame, and a voice, low, cold, impossibly calm, spoke from outside. Detective Matthews murmured, "You can't run from what was already waiting."